All right, so once you have your initial kind of like finalized polished sketch done, what we're going to start to do is looking at adding your color, your value, blending, shading, looking at incorporating kind of that next step beyond just line. So there's essentially two approaches that you can do. One is to work entirely with grayscale, kind of thinking of just doing like black and white. Where are your midtones, where are your highlights, where are your shadows, doing that all black and white, and then overlaying with color. The other option is to just go in with color. So you can do either one. I'm going to just kind of demonstrate a bit of each. So depending on the method that you want to go with, that'll be up to you. First thing we're going to do though is in your layers tab, we want to create an additional layer. So right now I have my background, my initial sketch. Since I have polished this up, this is the point where I could take that out. And then I have my finalized sketch. For adding in your color, value, shading, we're going to start to add in an additional layer. The one thing to keep in mind is with these, what's at the bottom is furthest back. What is at the top is going to be closest to the surface. So if you want to have your color underneath your lining, and you want to keep this more illustrative where you see these lines within your piece, I would say put the blended color layers back behind there. So then when I go and draw in, I'm essentially working behind my line instead of in front of it. Whereas if you're someone that wants to go a little bit more realistic, then I would say bring that layer above your outline, since eventually we will not have that outline left, and then you're working on top of that outline. So just kind of keep that in mind depending on the style, type of drawing that you want to do. That ends up being up to you, but just kind of keep in mind with those layers of space how you can use those to effectively overlap and underlap different information. Otherwise, as we get started, like I mentioned, you can look at slowly just working with value first. If you're doing that, I would say stick with your grayscale ramp. I would say as you start working, it can be helpful with this value approach to kind of think of where are those darker tones that you're seeing, where are those lighter tones. So as I start working through, I'm going to start to look at where I'm seeing kind of my key shadows and key information. And with this approach, you're almost thinking of mapping out essentially kind of like the initial just value that you're seeing first. And then as you work through, then going in, blending, smoothing, adding those transitions. But this can be a nice way to work where instead of going in with color right away, it can be a little bit more minimal. It can also help if you're struggling to kind of identify the colors that you're seeing within your reference, or if you want to alter those a little bit, can be a nice approach in the sense that you are going to have kind of that initial value layer, and then when you overlay, you're not having to think so much about the color complexity, and you can think just on the overall kind of like base colors of those different items. So it has its benefits. Some people do really prefer this method. It can be a nice way just of separating out value and color, and then allows you to focus more on just kind of value, blending, shading first. And then as you work in incorporating color, then you're going to start to look more at what are you seeing as far as like transitions and kind of base color. So can be helpful, especially if you're feeling a little overwhelmed or you feel like you need to make some alterations. But that is going to be that approach with value, starting first with kind of mapping out the value that you see from your reference, and then bringing that over. The other approach is going to be looking at incorporating color first. So it'll be pretty much the same method. I would say switch out of the grayscale ramp. A couple of good options as far as different menus to work from. Hue Cube is usually a pretty popular one. Sometimes people do like brightness cubes. This one's a nice one as far as kind of understanding saturation in relationship to those colors. Color wheel can be nice as well too. There's kind of two menus in here, one that gives you kind of that initial color, and then the triangle is going to control how light, how dark, how saturated that color is. So this is one that is usually pretty preferred. The sliders can be a little complex. I would say don't really go with those, but the three that I would recommend would be either Hue Cube, Brightness Cube, or Color Wheel. And then as you get going, pretty much kind of same thing as with kind of working with your grayscale, is you're going to be thinking on incorporating kind of just like base colors that you see first. As you go through, instead of working just black and white, you are going to start to look at starting to identify more of those individual tones that you see, looking at kind of overall shades. So it is a little bit more of a complex method. That said, either way works out with this one. I would say just kind of be mindful of taking your time, making sure you're happy with your color selection. And then as you go through, you can layer in more and more. And I would say as you start with kind of just incorporating base colors, kind of think on like base color first. And then once you have that in, then start to look at the changes between kind of initial gradation, where you're seeing those color shifts happening within those different items. And remember, it doesn't have to be a perfect replica of your reference either. And then if you are looking for using some of the information from your reference, is using your eyedropper tool. It'll be over here on the far left. What you can also do is use the key I to toggle that. Then what you can do is you can select out the color that you're seeing within your reference, and then you can use that within your final project and then use that to map out the value. One thing to keep in mind, sometimes what you see versus what color gets selected, since oftentimes with these they are selecting out kind of like 1 pixel or a very small amount of pixels, sometimes you end up hitting like a shadow or a color that isn't exactly what you're looking for. So don't be afraid to, once you have this kind of initial value, like I'm not loving the shade, I might decide that I want this to be a little bit more green, a little bit more saturated, and don't be afraid to play with those colors that you are seeing. Sometimes what gets selected isn't that perfect replica of what you're seeing. It can be helpful just to kind of help identify where you're seeing those shadows change or where you're seeing more of that depth within your initial reference. That said, I would not hold steady with just using the eyedropper tool. I would say start to incorporate your own colors, your own shade can be a good way to kind of get a base of what you're looking for, but I would not use it as the sole determination of the colors that you use. So use them in combination, but also select out your own colors. So like this, I'm obviously picking up more of that shadow. So then I might decide, okay, I'm going to go to a slightly brighter color, slightly more saturated, and then use that within there as well, so that when I go into blend, I have a little bit more color complexity to work with, and what Photoshop is picking up and what your eye is picking up sometimes is very different. So just kind of keep that in mind. I would say do not use the eyedropper to get every single color that you're seeing. Use it as just kind of a base to get base shades and to help kind of identify more of those true or natural tones. But you don't have to use the eyedropper tool at all. It can all be your own selection. But it is available as an option, and it's a nice one too, where if like I have these colors for this line, let's say I move on and I work on something else, and then in an hour or two or a few days later, then I'm going to work on this lime slice over here, then what I can do is I can figure out, okay, I used that shade for this one, so I want to use something similar as I move over here as well. So I'd say use your eyedropper tool more to help kind of remember and pick up those colors that you used before, instead of using it solely within your reference photo. But those will be the two options for getting started. Let me know if you have questions. Either way works out fine, of using just the grayscale to using going in with color right away. So either way works out. And then as you start to kind of get initial colors sequenced and put in, then you're going to start looking at your blending, your shading, incorporating texture, and more of that information. But that should be everything. I will let you go. Let me know if you have questions.